Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 35 of Lit Happens. And today we're going to be speaking about the new English Studies Stage 6 course. Joining me this morning, we have Belle. How you going, Belle?
Hi, everyone. I'm well, Adriel. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm enjoying this lovely, lovely warm weather at the moment, which
Yes.
hopefully lasts. As we go into spring, I'm looking forward to it. Springing into the new HSC course as well. No pun intended right there.
Love that. Love
that. Look, it was Father's Day yesterday. I'm not a dad, by the way, let's be honest. But I thought I'd throw in a bit of a dad joke there.
You're a dad of the heart for many, many people, and you know it.
That's true. We have taught many kids over the years.
Yes, and do you remember there were times when I was pregnant where students would say, "Is that Mr. Maddie's wife?"
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Oh man, so funny. Children say funny. The darndest things.
The funniest things. That's true. That's true. Hey, anyway, let's get straight into our app today, Bill, and let's get started with our Lit Happens question for today. And this is to do with our studies course.
Okay.
Do you think all English students, English study students, should be required to sit the HSC exam?
That's a good question, and I'm going to be interested to see where we line up with this, like whether we agree or disagree. I'm a big this is a hard one because I have a few different thoughts here. So one, what I love about the English Studies course, which sets it apart from the others, is that there isn't that pressure to sit an exam, and therefore if you're not going to get an ATAR, like you don't do exam or you don't do the exam, you understand that you're not going to get an ATAR. Yeah. And why I love this is because back in the day, students used to be able to sign out very easily after year 10 if they knew that further education wasn't for them. Obviously, the rules and regulations around that have tightened completely. Now I believe you need full-time work with relevant documentation from an employer. And sometimes for 16-year-olds, it can take a bit of time to lock in work. Yeah. And then you have this in between where students are neither here nor there. So what I loved about studies was it could take the pressure off, because usually students who pick studies do not want to do exams, do not want an ATAR, do not want the HSC. So do not want to do all the nitty gritty things of HSC English. So it was a beautiful course because you didn't have that pressure of I'm preparing them for exam. You could actually just focus with them on literacy skills, which is usually our studies kids generally have quite poor literacy skills. Now, I know there are some students who move into that course for maybe mental health reasons or whatever else, but generally that was the case. And so when they added in there is an exam, you can do it, you don't have to do it. I'm not going to lie, it makes it very awkward for me as a studies teacher when I did teach studies to bounce between who's sitting the exam, who's not. How much do I have to dedicate to exam skills, how much not? Because that is a thing. I know we say we don't teach to the exam, but we have to. But part of the teaching to the exam is exam skills. If you're just trying to get through content with a studies class to then add on exam skills, personally, I'm not a fan. I don't want them to sit an exam. But I also agree that means that they're not entitled to an ATAR, and I think that that's a decision students have to make. I'm not a fan of the exam. To me, it doesn't make sense to be wishy-washy, some do, some don't, because even their exam looks very, very different to the other exams. And we'll talk about that more later. But I might get flack for this, but I'm a quit. I don't like that there's an option. I'd rather just you do studies, you don't do an exam. I don't know. What do you
Mm,
think?
mm. I like that you brought up the old school certificates, which is probably we were probably one of the last few years that actually said it back in the day. And as you did say, it gave that option for students to actually, sign out of school in year 10, and it was quite a intense exam. I don't know if you remember back in the day
Yes.
the old school certificate. We used to always have those rumors going around where if you don't pass this, you don't get to sign out, or you have to repeat, or all of this. And
Yeah,
I
you could
just think
hang it
it's
over
like
their head.
yeah, that's right. And I think it's a bit of a cultural thing as well. I've always been a proponent of, people having to strive towards something, and you have to obviously work towards something and get over it, rather than the direction that our education system has taken in probably the last 10 to 15 years, where we have more of a band descriptor or range descriptor for students, and we've stepped away from examinations a lot in terms of our assessments, because for many reasons, I will say. I guess just from my personal experience being older, we're just used to, always competing, always striving in terms of exams. And I personally would say this, the studies exam, I don't think there should be an exam for the English studies course. As you were saying, I think it should be more of a life skills, very similar to, I guess, that work studies course that some schools run as
Yeah.
well. Um, but I feel as though you dilute the course a little bit when you sit the exam for studies, and this is why I think it should remain for your standard and your advanced course. So I don't think they should be required to sit the exam. As you were saying, having taught the kids, it's very difficult to cater to two streams of students in one class, and like you were saying, you've got obviously a whole bunch of personalities. I don't know if the powers that be will have sat in one of these English studies classrooms before, but um, the characters that you get in these classrooms will
Yeah.
definitely dictate the kind of learning that you are going to be having. Yeah, so fortunately, we had a bigger cohort of study students at our school last time we taught together, which meant that we could actually stream the studies classes into one that wanted to do the exam and kids that didn't want to sit the exam. So yeah, I guess it just depends on how your school is structured. I just think personally, standard and advanced English kids need to be doing standard and advanced English. English is such a critical subject, but that could be my bias because we just learn so much in terms of critical thinking, the skills associated with the course, and looking at the text and finding information. I know recently I had some of my 11 students where I was like, "Hey guys, remember when we used to do the who, what, when, where, how questions? Those critical thinking questions that we sort of start to establish in primary school." Like a lot of kids don't do that, and this is in like my advanced course. And I was just
Mhm.
like, I just think there's such a fundamental sort of importance for the subject of English,
I
where
agree.
if kids are going into stage 6, they need to be engaging with some sort of examination at the end,
Yeah, I
that
agree.
does get them to
And I
do that.
think
But yeah, look, yeah,
I just think the beauty of the studies course is such a great course. Like you really do your real life application and just slow things down, and it's
mm,
a beautiful course, and I feel like sometimes it loses that when we're
yeah,
trying to shove in all the exam and all of that. So yeah, I
mm,
just feel like it's
mm.
beautiful on its own as it is. Yeah. What more
Yeah,
can I say?
it is what it is. Oh
Mm,
well,
mm.
looks like it's a big can of worms we've opened, and I mean, if anyone's listening from Nessa, bring back the school certificate. That's my.
Yeah.
I'm just, I don't know. Anyway, that's me being silly.
Mm.
Let's get started with our episode because I know
Yes.
we've had some teachers sort of reach out and speak about the studies course, in wanting to know how we can structure the assessments, the texts, and
Mm.
looking at a few of the big changes, I guess, in terms of the course itself. So I guess we'll start off with what's new and why does the course, why are these changes? Why do they matter for us, Bill?
Yeah. I think what's different about the changes they've made in the studies course is there's more of a shift on literacy through deeper, slightly more literary texts.
Yeah.
Which I think shocked a lot of studies teachers. If you look at the new prescriptions, there are a few texts on there that you might reflect and think, Jesus, how am I going to teach that to my studies students? We will get there. We are English teachers. We do amazing things. We shall persevere. But I think there's a little bit more of that focus on the literacy and literary aspect, the real world application, and the way that the outcomes connect. It's really on building skills progressively. So it is trying to, in a more streamlined way, focus on the accessibility of the students' reading and writing skills. So if you look at the new prescriptions and new syllabus, you'll see that the rationale is about supporting students to refine their knowledge, understanding, and skills in English, consolidate literacy skills, and enhance personal, educational, social, and vocational lives. So it's trying to do a bit of everything at once, I think, this new course. Build their general literacy, look at real world and vocational application of these skills, and possibly more social, personal, and educational application as well. So the aim, if you look at the new aim, it really focuses on enabling students to understand and use language effectively. That seems to be like the crux, and then everything else branches off of that. So if they can understand and communicate effectively, they can get that through text and also develop their own personal communication skills. So there's also, with the new course here, the inclusion of the more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices as well. And just lastly, one of the bigger changes too is if you look at the outcomes for the new syllabus for studies, they've got 5 outcomes. They do build progressively. You'll see the first one is about explaining and interpreting ideas. So teachers who listened to our advanced and standard episodes a couple of weeks ago will note that standard had more of a analyze word to it. Advanced had that more critically and evaluate. And so with the studies, it explains and interpret ideas, explains how authors shape meaning, and then it's about identifying connections between texts as opposed to sort of examining deeply or analyzing, and then also that idea of composing and communicating. So I think what they've done is they've tried to make more of a connection between the standard course with the studies in the way that they've organized their assessment and also the text selections, which I know we'll talk about more deeply there. But there is a little bit more of a streamline and connection, I think. So right now, teachers would be planning and preparing because term 1 of next year, 2026, you're starting the new year 11 course for studies, standard, advanced, etc. And then by term 4 next year, you're starting the first year 12 topic. And this is really important for studies teachers because, as I'll talk about in the next segment, you're no longer starting with achieving through English. You're starting with sort of a reading to write unit as well. And I'll talk about that more deeply. So some really significant changes here.
Yeah, there are quite a few there. And one of the core principles of the studies course that I seem to sort of enjoy is the fact that it does enable students, as per its aim, enable students to understand and use language effectively. I know a lot of the students that often sit their studies course are sitting in that course because it's like, well, I won't really need English standard or advanced because I'm considering, moving into a job sort of in the next term or two. And this is where you were sort of speaking about this earlier, where people could sign out at the end of year 10 after sitting a school certificate examination. These days, kids do have to stay in. They may not necessarily stay for the whole of the stage 6 course. And, if we can empower them with some skills in being able to use language effectively, I think it becomes quite important. So that's probably one of those big things that we do need to consider when planning for the studies course. Now, moving into the planning stages here, let's have a look at the course structure. How does the studies course look when considering this new prescriptions here?
Yeah, so it is 120 hours course. So reading to write is the first topic. Well, this is the thing. When I look through the syllabus, I don't recall seeing it must be the first unit, but it makes
Mm.
sense if it's the first unit because it's also then what standard and advanced are doing. And, potentially students can talk and there's that cross correlation between the
Yeah.
topics. So English studies teachers of the past would note that they always started with achieving through English. So that has become an elective now, and I'll talk about that further down in the text types. But your term 1, you're doing your reading to write transition to English studies. So in that transition, there are parts of the rubric and parts of the outcomes and specific content points that are about these transitioning skills and trying to elevate these students from those more stage 5 skills to those more stage 6, giving them that confidence to read and write effectively sort of thing. And so that's the first unit. And then there are no prescribed texts, but you do that reading to write transition in term 1. And then term 2 and term 3 is left over for electives. There are, I think, at least 8 electives. I'll talk about them further. But a lot of these electives were there in the last course too. So for teachers who are programming, you could just, slot in what you were already doing as part of the electives in term 2. And then term 3, usually they also sit a prelim exam. So with that pattern of study, you do have to have one print text in year 11, and it says one multimodal text. Even though there's no prescribed text list, one must be print, so like fictional novel or something similar, and multimodal text. It does also have to have range of text types, range of authors, Australian perspective, ATSI perspective, an element of diversity and integrated modes like all the other courses did. That's year 11.
Yep.
And then year 12, so again, 120 hours. So it's a little bit different now. So that very first term of year 12, they are doing narrative and human experiences. I believe the rubric and outcomes here are more specific to studies as opposed to standards. So teachers programming, you might be able to use a lot of what you were doing. However, there is a new set of prescribed texts, and I'll talk about those texts as we go further along as well. But one prescribed text for narrative and human experience in there. Now, what's a bit new is now there is a unit called Writing for Purpose. This seems to very much mimic Module C in Standard and Advanced, and also seems to be a bit of a replacement for where studies teachers and students used to do portfolio work and submit portfolios. So pretty much where you would have a student's portfolio over the year of all the different text types that they wrote, a narrative and all those kinds of things. It seems to now be within its own separate unit that you must do, and you have to do at least 4 prescribed texts from this list. We'll talk about the prescribed text later. Yeah. And so that leaves you then with 2 more terms of work. So two electives, 1 per term. And again, making sure that one is a substantial print text, one is a substantial multimodal. So this is all from the new syllabus document that has all these details here. And when you're looking at the electives, I am going to talk about texts a little bit further down, but you have a few of your options that you used to have anyway, like the big screen's still there on the road. You do part of a family still there. You do have some new ones, I believe. I think I have to double check, but representing the past, things like that. Achieving through English, which we used to do in term 1 of year 11, is now an elective. So, I really love that. A lot of teachers I know with studies love that, because usually we get into the more communicative English, the more vocational English. A lot of us have tasks in that one where we get them to create a resume and a cover letter, and they sit a mock interview, and it's a really fun unit because it gets the students thinking about what are my next steps into the future. So it is an elective. We just don't start with it, which makes me personally really sad. I think it's the perfect way to start studies in prelim. But that's what's on the new list for now.
Yeah, I like that they're giving you a few more options as well in terms of electives. It gives you a bit more choice as a teacher when it comes to your programming as well. So. Again, I think what you mentioned that stood out for me just then was when you are planning, especially for term 1 in year 11, make sure you are mimicking and speaking with the teachers at your school that do the standard, that do the advanced course as well, because they are sort of amalgamating a little bit of the
Yes.
three levels of English together. So it's important that you're all having that discourse and that dialogue together in order to best prepare your students for both the prelim course and the HSC course. But in saying that, let's move on to our next little area here that we're going to be discussing. And this is assessment and the HSC sort of, what does it look like? What
Mhm.
do studies look like now in terms of
Mhm.
assessment? I know you've covered this a
Mhm.
little bit, but also how does it look in terms of the HSC examination and the HSC course in general as well?
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. Okay, so in year 11, it's 3 tasks, 1 formal examination, and then there is no more of that must do a multimodal caveat, so that'll take a bit of pressure off. And then whatever your other 2 tasks are, all 3 tasks, sorry, I should say, across all 3 tasks,
Mm.
making sure your weighting is between 20 and 40%. That's kind of the only caveat that I could see from the new syllabus. So
Yeah.
you just made an excellent point right before we got into this segment. Do think about what you're doing in year 12, because that will then help you determine what assessment tasks and what skills you're going to assess where in year 11. So it's really important
Mm.
to backward map. So I guess the most important thing now is what is the assessment required for the HSC. So out of the syllabus document, 4 tasks. Now, it does say out of those 4 tasks, there needs to be a critical response, creative response, and 1 formal examination. So
Yep.
a little bit of leeway, but making sure that you're hitting those different text types. So in the documents, it actually says schools have, I took this from NESA, schools have the authority to determine the number, type of task, and the weighting allocated to the assessment task. But schools can also follow, sorry, a sample assessment program that NESA put on their website. And it looks a little bit
Mm.
like this. So it's really good that they've put this because, as you can see, that just is not very direct. It seems that there's a lot of
Yeah.
options there. And
Mm.
I'm making an assumption that perhaps that's because they've taken away that portfolio component. And so
Mm.
now it's letting you work how you need to for your students. But this is their sample plan, which I think is a really good, clear one to follow. So your 4 tasks could look like this. 1 task is a critical response. So
Yep.
maybe putting that in your narratives unit would make a lot of sense. 1 task is a creative response. So putting that in the unit, what was it called? The Module C-esque unit, writing for purpose, would make sense to me
Purpose.
putting
Yeah.
it there. Yeah. Then 1 task is to be a formal examination. So that would
Mm.
be probably a trial exam. I think it is good to get studies to sit
Yeah.
their own trial exam there. Yeah. And then the last suggestion is a weighting for any individual task of 10 to 40%. My suggestion would be that that's on one of your electives. If your
Mm.
students enjoy multimodal, or you do a visual rep or something that helps them score a bit better, you could probably tack that in
Yeah.
somewhere. Yeah, so I think this is where you think about what text you're doing in year 12 and what your cohort looks like and where you're
Mm.
trying to be a little bit strategic to maybe in that extra task bump them up a little bit where they might not do as well in their trial exam and perhaps the essay response.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Like being strategic in the way that your school sort of functions, your demographic functions, and giving the students the best opportunity, I guess, to thrive when we're looking at the aims of this whole new
Yeah.
rationale and prescription. So
Yeah. So because
yeah.
there's now a change in the assessment structure and a change in the topics, on the curriculum website, I am planning, I've written it down, it's on my to-do list, to put some sort of document up with all these links to make it a bit easier for you to find it. Because I won't lie,
Mm.
I'm on those websites all the time and it still takes me time to troll through and find
Yeah.
stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, so there is a sample paper that you can see that they've
Mm.
suggested as a guideline. So the HSC external exam for studies, again, it is an optional choice. If they choose to not sit it, however, it does mean no ATAR. So students
Yeah.
just prepare for that. It's 1 written paper. They've said 2 hours of working time, 10 minutes of reading time. And it looks a bit like this. So the sample paper, I'm describing what I saw online. Section 1, the section 1 was narrative and human experiences short answers. So in here, 4 to 5 short answer items or questions
Yep.
with a few different text types. Items based on the questions are based on, the stimulus or unseen text related to narrative and human experience. So very much your typical short answer unseen, but maybe some
Yep.
more accessible text for studies. Then your section 2, narrative and human experience extended response on their prescribed texts. So students will be required to write an essay response on their narratives text. So you know that that's definitely a given. And then section 3 is now the writing for purpose section. So that could be imaginative, analytical, informative, persuasive. I haven't really seen the verbiage for discursive here. I'll try and confirm that along the way. But yeah, so in this section 3, it looks a little bit different too, because it's not necessarily your typical write an imaginative and then do a reflection, or just do an imaginative. So it looks a little bit like this. So 2 to 3 items, one item worth at least 15 marks. Let me just get it up in front of you so I can quickly describe it. So for example, on the sample one, they have for section 3, writing for purpose, a 5 marker, write a brief speech for year 11 students explaining how engaging with text can help improve their written expression. A 10 marker, explain how writers use important ideas to connect with their readers. Refer to at least one of your prescribed texts set for study, so within the purpose unit. And then C, there's a bit of a stimulus, and it says, use this statement as a basis of a piece of an imaginative about a moment that led to personal growth. So it's a little bit different because I don't know, it's sort of like trying to hit all the bases. I didn't really notice anything about the electives in there, where that makes me think then the electives are more so of an in-class school-based assessment and in your trial. So that's where you look at that paper. It looks really similar to our old area of study type papers.
Yeah. That's
Doesn't
the
it?
sort of vibe that I was sort of looking at, those old area of studies, paper 1. Question that we always used to get. So maybe they have, recycled it, like all good teachers and education system. We sort of go back through the archives and the annals of history there, and bring back a few things. So that's probably what they're doing, to be honest. It looks like it.
So
And it might be good to actually look at a few old area of study papers. So those paper 1s, because they were structured at 60 marks, if I'm correct, 315 mark. Not 60 marks.
Yeah.
Me.
What was it? No, I know what you're saying. 45.
45 marks, I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, 315 mark sections. Back when it is, we've been part of this new sort of exam, because it was out of 105. That's what I remember now.
That's right. I mean, exactly. So you're right, because even in this sample one, section 1 and 2 is still 15 marks each, like it was in the old area of studies. It's just the section 3 that's out of 30, because you can see that they have like different components in there.
And it's more geared towards studies.
It's more geared towards studies. I still think it's a hard test for studies, but we've already had that conversation.
Awesome. Anyway, that's great that you've broken down the assessment task there, Bill, and it's fantastic. I'm sure the little document that you will have coming, as all of the stuff that you've produced so far, has been very, very informative for our teachers. Let's move into a little bit of the text selection deep dive. Now, I know that we've spoken a little bit about what the course entails, the new electives, the new sort of forms that we're sort of considering. But what are some of the texts that our teachers can start to consider when we are looking at the studies course?
Yeah, good question. So year 11, you have a lot of options, because there aren't any real prescribed texts, other than the fact that make sure one is substantial print text and one is multimodal. So this is a nice chance to explore maybe a little bit of like youth fiction, if you've got, some perhaps like some dystopias or something that's engaging for the students without going to in the nitty gritty of form. I think in year 11, you're trying to capture some attention that they might have to hopefully, and some engagement to hopefully sustain them. But digital storytelling will be huge in this year 11 course, especially hits that multimodal component, but also a great way to engage. And looking at text from diverse communities, I think the most important thing in this segment is to talk about what we're doing in year 11 with the text, and then to backward map. Maybe we can offer after that some suggestions for year 11. So if you're looking at the year 12 course with the narrative and human experience, the prescriptions are a little bit different. Somebody who's across the different courses in English will see that a lot of stuff has kind of been taken out from studies and put and put into studies, which raised a lot of eyebrows for English studies teachers because it doesn't really work that way. Nonetheless, we work with what we have. So what we've got now is we've got a few choices then. So in terms of a novel and prose or a prose fiction, we've got Past the Shallows, which used to be a novel in the studies course, in the standard course, sorry. So potentially if you're a school that used to teach that, you might pop it into your studies. I'll give some suggestions later as to, I think, ways around or ways to work with these difficult texts because they can be quite difficult for some of our studies classes. I have some suggestions. We'll talk about that later. But we've got that. We've also got the First Nations Then and Now collection. So you've got a lot of different short texts, like from Tara June Winch, Janine Leanne. So there's, if you want like little short, sharp and sweet, perhaps that's an option. You've also got then poetry. Bruce Dawes' poetry has made a return. It's in studies now. I think Bruce Dawes' poetry is really deep and rich. So you probably have to be very deliberate about how you do it with those guys. Yeah, even Ujaranunakul's My People poetry, definitely poems that many of us are familiar with if we've used it in other topics and stuff like that. You've got also film, media, nonfiction, One Night the Moon, which is a great Indigenous film text. So many will recognize that that's in the current standard course. So I believe it's in Module A. So that's been moved over. Obviously, standard can still do that. So that's fine as well. And then probably the biggest prescribed, so that's all the selections for narrative and human experience. So a bit of a smaller selection there. 2 from each text type. And then when you get into the writing for purpose, which is functioning very much like the Module C, you'll see that some of the texts that used to be prescribed text in Module C, because they're kind of doing away with that now, I believe, in the standard advanced course, have come up in here. So popular ones like Dear Mrs. Dunkley are in here. The Pedestrian, which we have an episode on, go and check it out. We've also got in here Luca Lessons, May Your Pen Grace the Page. I think we've done an episode on this one. Adriel, correct me if I'm wrong. If we haven't, we will. We've done it. We've touched on it, I think. Yeah.
I don't think we've done a specific one, but we will get something out there.
Perhaps we can get to that. We definitely have some resources on this one on our website, so go check that out if you want access to that. And then a couple of things. There's a speech, Failures of Kindness, and a prose fiction, Tim Winton extracts. So with the writing for purpose, it says you need to do at least 4 with them. So you're definitely trying to do a range of types then. So I would say do one that's nonfiction, one that's prose, one that's poetry, and perhaps the speech just to spread around the text type love a little bit. And then that way, you can teach imaginative within the prose fiction. You might do elements of informative and reflective within the nonfiction, and then perhaps the speech as well. And then you can teach your persuasive elements alongside the speech form in that as well. So that is that for those 2 modules. When it comes to the electives, you're free to choose whatever you like. So very much what you're doing right now with your electives can just move across, make that a bit easier for you. So I'll just very quickly list the electives just for people's own visuals in their mind. So Voices of Australia, Media of Influence, The Big Screen, Everyday Heroes, On the Road, playing the game, lyrical voices, part of a family, uncovering the truth, the big screen, representing the past, achieving through English. So my suggestion there with those texts is you got to start with what you're doing in year 12. So identify if you're going to do, for example, the fictional pieces, then you know that you're doing that in that term, and then that leaves you to do a film or multimedia elsewhere, a bit of poetry elsewhere. So if I'm doing, for example, Past the Shallows as the prose text, what I then might be doing is in my electives, I might, for example, decide to do, just go back to my list real quick. I might decide to do On the Road, and then perhaps feature some poetry there for On the Road. Or Voices of Australia with some Australian poetry might work really nicely in there as well. On the flip side, if you did poetry, let's say you did Ujuru Nunakal's poetry or Bruce Dawes' poetry, and so if you did that there, then you might be able to do a kind of novella in one of the electives, and then a film in a third elective. There's the elective of the big screen. So the big screen works really nicely with film. Part of the family has a lot of great digital text. I know at my school, we've taught it with some films, some TV shows or episodes from TV shows to show the evolution of representations of family. If you did media and influence, you could hit the multimodal component in there as well. So again, lots of options, but definitely narrow down what you're doing within narratives and purpose, and that you've hit those text types there, and therefore you know what text types you're left with to touch on in those two electives that you're going to do. I think with the text types, just kind of lastly, I think you want to have a balance between texts that have some literary enrichment but perhaps are not too dense and overwhelming. Because I do find the studies, once it becomes a little bit difficult, they switch off. I know that for example, we've taught The Simple Gift within the studies course, which is a beautiful text and works perfectly. The students are engaged. It's really accessible. It's very relatable and a little bit gritty without getting too much into it and having to think about how you engage that socially with the students. Some popular and accessible texts might be really nice here, even if you have like some dystopian texts or or YA, young adult fiction. I think you've got to be very careful here. If you start doing those a bit more literary dense ones, not only will they maybe switch off, we know what studies classes can be like. You might have some, behavioral issues as a result. You might have a lot of stressed students who have picked studies because they are not coping with standard and advanced. There's, a lot of thought, I think, that has to go into this one, Adriel. What do you think?
Yes, I think it's important that we keep our programs a little bit more general in nature, just so you give yourselves more options when it comes to, I guess, planning for the different types of kids you are going to get in the studies course. I think it's one thing that we have seen over the years, that remember, kids that are choosing the studies course don't necessarily want to be doing a permanent or compulsory subject. So sometimes choosing those literary dense texts can be difficult for them. So it's up to you in terms of your discernment as a teacher and a teaching collective in the English faculty to really, really plan this out very carefully. So, let's move on then. Using that as a segue there, Bill. What are some of the programming and practical tips that you might have for our listeners?
Yeah, no, that was a perfect tip that you just gave. So leading in from that, I think what would work to help you achieve that would be if you start programming your units of work with the specific outcomes and content points, and then making your class activities be just about those content points and the skills there, as opposed to the specific text for now, because that will come. But if you just make an activity that's really deeply engaging with that outcome content, as opposed to the specific text type, then even if you have years or moments where you change a text, because we all know what it's like to get into a class after a week or two and go, this is not working, right? So if you went in and most of your activities are very holistic and focus more on the skills as opposed to the specific text, which incidentally is very much how the junior course is organized now anyway.
Yeah.
But if you do that, then even if you do change, everything that you did before is still not a problem, like it's still applicable because you are focusing more on the skill within English as opposed to the specific content. So I think if you do that, a couple of activities to hit each content point and then working in the specific text types, obviously you need to pick what you're doing in year 12. Otherwise, your year 11 will not match or marry up with your year 12. Especially because you need to decide on what text types you're doing in those two set prescribed lists, and then that leaves you open up for what electives are you doing, because the elective choices are across year 11 and 12, not just in year 12. So therefore, you need to know what you're doing so you can then work out the best order of where to put them. So, you know, if you start off with that narratives unit in year 11, you know, maybe you still want to do an achieving through English for your students. You know, you might decide, I'm going to do that next anyway, because you might know that there are students who are looking to leave at the end of year 11 when they turn 17 mostly. So that, you know what I mean? So this is where you said this a while ago. You have to also think a bit about your customers, as in your students and your cohort, and getting a sense at the start of year 11 of what their plans are. I know I always spend a week or two getting to know them, what their plans are, what they want to do after school, because it does help me sort of organize how and what I'm going to teach them. And every cohort is different. I know I taught with another fabulous teacher. She had the studies class majority because we were mat leavers. So she had the study class, shout out Hannah, she listens. She had majority of the class and I had a couple of lessons alongside her. And I know in that class, we had a group of students that Hannah was like, so-and-so definitely not doing the exam. So-and-so definitely want to do it. These ones don't, these guys might. And she had a very deliberate strategy to engage all that. And if she didn't know that from the get-go, she might have felt like she was scrambling a little bit. But because, you know, she took a lot of time getting to know them, then she was able to choose the electives that would work best, choose things that, you know, had. And so then I think the other thing with programming is whatever your topic and your elective is, you might, if you have a class of mixed students doing the exam and not, you might have a text that's a bit meatier and then a text that's a bit more light. And then that way, either of your students have the opportunity to come in and produce something. Yes. So you do have to be very much differentiating in that way if you've got a range of students going to do different things. I think what you do then is you also have to think about what assessments you're doing. This is probably going to take up a lot of the time, only because it's so non-specific how to assess studies now. You used to know because you knew that the portfolio was a big gig, and so you knew that whatever else you were doing around the assessment was working towards that. So now that hand in to NESA portfolio is not really, from what I can see, a thing, and it's more in the exam now, you know, it is going to change up what you had pre-prepared. So once you work out what your text are in year 12, you need to work out what assessments you're doing. Remember what I said before about what text types you have to hit in assessment, work back that way. And then once you've worked that out within each unit, what's my, you know, more thicker or difficult or more media text, what's my easier text, and then having a bit of related as well. I think when you get to the year 12 course, a lot of your module C prescribed texts could potentially be introduced first as like a related text in the text and human experience, you know, like Luca lessons, may your pen grace the page. It's not very long. It's very engaging. And it talks about a lot of human emotions and qualities. So I wouldn't even, I'm a very, you know what I want you to know, and that's that. I wouldn't even tell them, oh, and then later we're doing a module C and you're going to have to write. I wouldn't even tell them that. Just introduce the text. Oh, let's look at
Yeah.
this text. Let's see what he's saying about human experience as a related, then move into your core text, and then maybe have an extra little digital or little poem or something that's maybe a bit more accessible for your kids that are maybe struggling a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
That's some
100%.
of
I
my
like that.
tips.
I like that, Bill, and you've shared some fantastic tips and broken down the English Studies course in quite a bit of depth today. So, really appreciate your work there
Thank
for our
you.
listeners. Let's just sort of one final sort of thought here, and I like that you mentioned this at the end, is we really, really do need to be intentional in the way that we do plan these courses. Now we've gone through all three so far in the last few weeks with advanced, standard, and studies. But don't confuse intentionality with, once you've set something, it's set in stone. Like we have to
Yeah.
be adaptable. And I think that's one thing that not only enhances our skills as teachers, it gets us to adapt to, what our students actually need. And then this is probably something that will give you a little bit of joy in teaching. I know we can often fall into the little trap of wanting to. I know I've been privy to this as well in recent years, where it's just like, just tell me what to do and I'll just get it done. And, you just go through the motions of doing things. But I guess one of the joys in teaching is like, you go through, you are a problem solver at heart. You're wanting to solve the problems in the world and, inspire kids to enjoy your subjects. And just remember that in doing it, we're going to have lots of hits and misses. It's about throwing the darts at the board and hoping that, most of them do stick, or if they don't, you pick them up again and you throw them again and you keep on going and going and going. And this is just a little bit of encouragement. But Adriel, like teaching's just so busy with all the other stuff that I need to do. Trust me, shift your perspective a little bit. Think about the things you do enjoy doing rather than the 7 million negative things that we can talk about in our teaching profession, and just enjoy it. Each and every day you have a privilege to go in and shape the next generation. And I think that's something, as a bit of a lead on from our last episode, which was teachers' mental health as well. It'll keep your mind renewed as well. The more you sort of practice a lot of this programming. And, I've mentioned this before. I hate programming. This is why we called you the programming queen at our school.
I love it.
but,
I love it.
but I think, where my pride needs to be swallowed every now and then is, it is a great learning process. And just listening to you speak about these courses and the way you sort of go through planning it all out has been immense. I've learned so much in the last 3 episodes that we've recorded. So, well
I'm
done,
so
Belle.
glad. Oh, that's
Um,
such a pleasure.
and
Thank
I'm sure our
you.
listeners feel the same way. But look, guys, that brings us to the end of episode number 35, if I'm correct, which 35 of many more to come, because we do
Yeah.
like to speak and talk. Thank you once again for listening. Reach out with any questions. I know this episode was really brought about by some of our listeners actually, asking, are we going to be doing a studies course as well? And look, keep shouting out what you guys would like to hear. We have a few specific prescription based episodes coming up in the next few weeks. And just keep an eye on the socials, keep encouraging, engaging. Look, most of our growth is organically through you, our listeners. So if you want to just shout out Lit Happens in your social stories each week, once a week, that could be this could be a smart goal for our listeners, on your socials.
Talk about things you hate. Sorry, Adriel.
I'm
Far
joking.
out.
Let's not say
No,
smart
I
goals.
get you.
Let's say, hey guys, just
PTSD.
help us out. Yep, help us out.
I love it.
Keep popping us up on the socials, and the more listeners we get, the more opportunity we get to actually refine this program a lot more. But thank you once again, guys. Like us on Facebook. Not Facebook. We don't even have a Facebook. Like us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. We'll love your work, and thank you, Belle, once again for another wonderful episode.
Yeah, pleasure, and keeping up the good fight, guys. Everything I'm hearing from all my colleagues, like, you're doing amazing work. Well done. Keep at it.